likely to be arrested than a white child. Once arrested, 3.5 times more likely to be referred to juvenile court, more than 3 times more likely to be held in secure detention, and more than 3 times more likely to be sent to juvenile prison. This data confirms that what black and brown people have known forever, have witnessed, experienced, and fought against, 2 separate and unequal justice systems. More often than not, white kids are taken home to their parents, and black and brown kids get processed and subjected to the hyper-surveillance of our criminal justice system. Once in that system, normal youthful indiscretions, what I like to call petty antisocial behavior, or failures to comply only push them deeper into the system to the detriment of their futures. We can all agree that these numbers are unacceptable, but the negative impact and unintended consequences fall not just on these young people, but on the entire communities in which they live and the county as a whole. It undermines the system's legitimacy, it prevents economic development, destroys families, and leaves communities in tatters. Faith in public systems is paramount to a healthy democracy. A lack of legitimacy leads to anger, lack of buy-in to the rules, and ultimately an attitude of opposition by some who have had enough. We've seen this in Ferguson, Missouri, in New York City, in Baltimore, Maryland, and across our country as the Black Lives Matter movement has built. This is not a reaction to isolated incidents. It's the culmination of years of frustration with a system bound by racism that perpetrates inequality. When viewed through a historical lens, whether you're talking about young people or adults, this reaction is reasonable. Every arrest, every court referral, every adjudication leads to a potentially to cycling through the system and being more enmeshed in the system in the future. Once in the system, getting out is nearly impossible. Compliance is mandated, and non-criminal behaviors can land you in detention or prison for non-compliance. Young people are stigmatized and have difficulty reintegrating into their families, their schools, and their communities. Our men and women lose their jobs, their housing, educational opportunities, and families because they're incarcerated or because of the stigma of having a record. Communities of color suffer from the cumulative costs and consequences of a much larger proportion of their citizens being locked up in the system. They lose an entire generation of income earners, father figures, and potential taxpayers. The financial costs, however, are insignificant in comparison to the costs of losing a generation of young men of color. For too long, we've invested our resources in courts, correctional facilities, electronic monitoring, and more tools of coercion, instead of investing in infrastructure, economic development, and education. Between 2005 and 2009, the state of Illinois spent $550 million on incarcerating and monitoring people in the Austin community. That's $500 million spent on incarcerating and monitoring people in Austin. $293 million in Humboldt Park, $1/3 billion. $240 million in North Lawndale, $250 million. These are just a few examples, but imagine what we could do if we invested in these communities instead of investing in incarceration. I've been asked what I'm doing to end the disproportionate impact of this system on communities of color. I wish I could say I'm solving it, but the truth is that it's entrenched in every part of the system, and I control none. However, I can use my status to bring this issue to light, and I can use my political power and support to push candidates and policies that lessen the impact of racism. My thanks to those of you in this room, I've met some of you, who worked to end the automatic transfer of many of our juveniles to adult court, a law that almost exclusively impacted young people of color. Juvenile Justice Initiative did a study between 2010 and 2013. 257 young people were transferred to adult courts in Cook County. One of them was white. One, we've all got to work to address this issue. We need cooperation from all the stakeholders, and we need an acknowledgement that the system is not equal for all citizens and must be changed. We must address inequities at every decision point in the system. A systems approach would tell us that we must look at the feeders into the system, and that starts with policing and charging decisions. The fact is, the Cook County justice system is not actively seeking clients and can only address the people coming through our doors. If more youth of color are diverted instead of arrested, then by definition, fewer youth of color will be subjected to, I started to say prosecution, but it's really sort of persecution. Sentencing, violations of probation or parole. I applaud the committee for focusing on law enforcement as a starting point in this conversation. Let me just say, the people of Chicago comprise half the population of Cook County. Cook County has 5.3 million people, 2.75 million people in Chicago. But 80% of the people who come into the criminal justice system come from Chicago. Now, unless you think the people of Chicago are more likely to be criminals than people outside of Chicago, there's something wrong there. It's part of a larger issue. You know, as probably everybody in this room knows, we have 5% of the world's population. We have 25% of the people in jail or in prison. What I like to say is, you know, unless you think Americans are more likely to be criminals than people elsewhere in the world, we're doing something terribly wrong. And if you break that down even further, we incarcerate white people at about the same rates they do in Northern Europe. The reason we have such terrible incarceration rates is because we incarcerate black and brown people with just astronomical numbers. I had a conversation with the superintendent of police in Chicago when the ACLU study about stop and frisk came out. Let's just say it didn't go well. He accused me of raising my voice at him and walked away. Well, this is really a problematic issue. If you're going to stop and frisk people in black and brown neighborhoods much more than white neighborhoods, if you're going to do these DUI checks in black and brown neighborhoods much more than white neighborhoods, and then you have higher arrest records in black and brown neighborhoods, not just for DUIs and stop and frisk, but for everything. And then you say you allocate your police resources on the basis of arrests. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You arrest more black and brown people, and more black and brown people are going to end up in our criminal justice system. The roots of this issue are historical and complex, but the solution isn't as hard as you might think. Clear by the numbers that we must stop the harsher practices that we use in black and brown neighborhoods and start treating all of our youth of color the same as we treat our white youth. We have to give them the same chances we want afforded to our sons and daughters and grandsons. I hope you will continue talking about the issue of disproportionate minority contact and how we can no longer avoid dealing with it directly. Reducing racial and ethnic disparities must be part of our comprehensive plan to reform our juvenile and criminal justice system. Thank you very much.